all of this has not changed, and that's my title, and that's what I'll stop on, and leave maybe 5 minutes for questions if you have any. Is I started by saying the emphasis of the last 300 years, and as we are witnessing the third transformation of globalization 3.0, which is still unfolding, so we don't know where this is going to end, is the interplay between international trade and technological change. And you can add a third T to it, which is telecommunications. But I want to focus on the first two. So international trade, what used to be primarily trade in goods, has expanded to goods, services, data, information, inputs, and assets. That is the scope of what international trade has become in the last 300 years. Technology is any process or product that makes existing resources more productive. By that definition, we are in the midst of one of the largest explosions of technological change we have ever seen in the history of mankind. And I'm talking of the last 30, 40 years, right? And the last 30, 40 years are even more transformational than 1750s when we started with the steam engine, or 1870s when we electrified, when we first invented the electric bulb, right? But what we're seeing right now with the connectivity technology that's going on in the IT world, which has become ITES, the enabled services world, we don't quite know where this is going to end. There are two big storm clouds that have gathered against this, which I want to leave you on as challenges. So all of this is incredible opportunities for individuals, for entrepreneurs, and also a call to duty for the government, national and state, to do the right things and the right investments. The two storm clouds. One, if you look at the demographic graph of the world, it's fascinating. The line hugs the x-axis from, you go back to when we had recorded history of number of people on this planet. Till 1950, it's a very straight line, very close to zero axis, x-axis. In 1950, it starts going up. And in 2012, for which I have the last data, in 2012, there are more people alive today than all the people who have been born and died since history. There are more people alive today on this planet than all the people who have born and died since history. So this does two things. Population is the ultimate, like technology, is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's new markets, it's new labor, employable labor, presumably, but it also means more pressure on resources. Everything from housing to schooling to water to everything. So this, how we create the opportunities for this expanded population, is one of the biggest challenges the world faces. The second storm cloud, which has concluded recently, if you remember, the Paris summit, is the environmental movement that's come about in the last 20, 30 years. Whether it's climate change, whether it's do we have enough resources to feed all of this 8 billion people that we have. India, incidentally, is in the crosshairs of both of these storm clouds, because in 20 years we will cross China as the #1 populated country in the world. Right? As I said, it's a double-edged sword because it's more hands for working, it's more people to buy your products, it's more brains that can produce interesting technologies, life-saving technologies, but if not harnessed or not managed well, it can also be an incredible drag that has to be met in some ways, that doesn't have social revolution and so that other kinds of problems. Environment, the emphasis on climate change and what it means to rising sea levels, acidification of the oceans, land degradation, is all new. It's very, very new. And businesses are waking up to how to deal with this, because they're not, in some ways they are dealing with a triple bottom line, they're talking about sustainability, but it hasn't become part of their vocabulary. Because we ourselves have woken up to the environmental issues only in the last 20, 30 years. And there are still many, many people in the West who deny that there's something called an environmental problem, right? If you've been paying attention to the US political primaries that are unfolding, there are many, many people, including elected congressmen there, who deny climate change, right? Whether you believe in it or not, the science is pointing in one way, and it's putting an enormous pressure on policymakers and businesses on how do you deal with this brewing storm cloud on the horizon. At some point we will figure out a way through these storm clouds, but I don't want to end on a very rosy note and say that there's no problem, because you won't believe me. So these are the two big pressures that I see looming that have to be addressed by at the national level, at the state level, and ultimately at the local level, whether you're a business or an institution or what have you, right? So I know I'm going to run out of time in the next few seconds, so I want to leave you with the last point about we live in, and this is really all of you who are very, very young, because you belong to the cohort that India claims a lot of pride in. 50% of India is like you, less than 35, less than 30, right? You're the future, and ultimately what you do with your lives and how you harness these forces of trade and technology, whether you physically leave Trichy or you don't, it doesn't matter. That's immaterial. I hope you got that from my talk. Is how you let your education, how you guide it, how you continually invest in it. Because all the statistics are pointing out that the job you get will not be your first and last job. Most of you will change 7 or 8 jobs by the time you're retired. Gone are the days when you're like your father or me, who's worked in one institution for a long, long time. This idea of change is become part and parcel of not just the IT field, it's just spreading throughout the employment landscape. The other thing is employability. It is very, very important, and this is from my call to all my educator colleagues in this room and the students. It is as important to not just worry about the degree you're getting here. It's how do you continue to invest in a human capital as you're going through your educated life. Because that is what, if anything, we are seeing from all the studies and data and surveys that are coming, is that the globalized world puts more and more premium on how employable you are at that point in time when the knock on the door comes, right? And it doesn't mean when you last had your degrees. How do you continue to remain aware? I don't mean educated, I mean aware. Educated is a formal degree, taking classes, taking exams. How do you continue to remain aware, and how do you remain connected? Because if anything, what we have seen in the last 300 years, and certainly what we have seen in the last 30 years in India, is that India has finally decided that it's going to go back to being not just a liberalized and a marketized economy, it's going to join the nations as a globalized economy. We are not there yet, but that's the trend you get from Delhi, that's a trend you got from the previous regime, and even if there's a change in power, I don't see this trend disappearing. What may happen is we'll go up and down, but the trend line of increased globalization will always remain. And the last thing is what was most fascinating about the 1750s, right? I started at Smith, but that is because I'm an economist. But let me end with why, as a citizen of India, as a student of India, you should be concerned, or you should care about this. When the last world data was done for comparative country incomes, in 1750, the richest country in the world was India. The second richest country was China. So it's not surprising that these two countries actually think that the last 300 years was a bit of an aberration. And it was mainly because of colonialism and the Western influences that we lost our position. Right? So it's fascinating when you go back to 1750 and see the wealth of the entire, and there was nothing called a physical entity of India, but if you add the Mughal Empire and the Nayakans and all of that, this entity, what is a subcontinent, was, by all accounts, the richest country in the world. Right? Now, of course, we lost a lot of that, was taken away by the colonials. But what is interesting is there's an opportunity now in India, for the first time I feel in the last 50, 60 years, that over the last 4 or 5 years, or last 10 years I should say, and certainly over the last 25 years, we are no longer talking about 3.5%, 4% growth rates. One of my former professors at Delhi School of Economics, Raj Krishna, was credited with coining the phrase Hindu rate of growth, 3.5%. India could never do 2% we'll never do 2, we'll never do 5. We'll always bump along at 3.5. For the very first time, if you look at the last 25 years, we have generally averaged upwards of 5, 6, 7 real growth rate. I'm not talking of nominal growth rates, right? So we are definitely reached a different plateau, and the question is, how do you keep that going? And that resides in all the youngsters in this room, whom I'm sure and confident that will take this forward. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
We would now like to take questions from the audience.
Good morning, sir. I'm Daniel. I'm a research scholar at BIM. So basically, what I observe from the ground realities when it comes to the economy is there is a large part of economy which is not accounted for. It's not just an Indian scenario. Probably for my global travels, a lot of these cash trade transactions and whatever data that is available with us probably comes from the so-called banking transaction where we have the clear data and where any kind of turnover is captured. So when we look at this part, is there any numbers? When we say that we have 10% of the economy which is in white and which is where we have the data for, because it looks like we have all the numbers and policies and decisions made out of looking at the data which probably represents just 5% or 10% of the real economy. So how do we
So the